Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our final closing session of the first day of the Investable Showcase Virtual 2020. Of course, our second full day of content takes place next Monday, the 16th, leading into the Jeffries Healthcare Conference from the 17th to the 19th. We've had a lot of discussions today and kicked off this morning with George's presentation on biotech in 2020 and beyond. I'm delighted now to be hosting a panel of industry-leading investors from Europe who are going to be sort of giving the investment perspective from their side on where they see things going. So please do ask questions in the Q&A section to the right of the video, and we'll get to them during the panel and towards the end. But for now, I'll hand you over to our moderator, Graham Defries with Goodwin. So Graham, the stage is yours.
Josh, thanks very much, and thanks to LSX. I'm Graham Defries. I run the life science transactional practice at Goodwin Procter, which is a Boston-based law firm in our London office. But we have life science professionals, lawyers all over the world in almost all of our offices. We're delighted to be able to serve and have served for the last 20 years at least the biotech community on the West Coast, on the East Coast, and more recently in Europe. And I'm delighted to be joined today by a very expert panel of European VCs who are leaders in their fields. And I'm going to ask them each to just spend 30 seconds or 45 seconds introducing themselves. I'm going to start with Houman from SV Health.
Hi, thanks, Graham, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. I'm Houman Ashrafian, Managing Partner at SV Health Investors. We've got a footprint in London and Boston, and regard ourselves as transatlantic investors. Our major activity, as well as syndication, is company creation. We regard ourselves as a good company creation shop. I look forward to the discussion today.
And Maina next, please.
I am Maina Bhaman. I'm a partner at Sofinova Partners. We're a Paris-based venture firm, probably one of the oldest in Europe. We have offices in London and Milan, as well as Paris. And we our firm has a number of different franchises or a number of different funds that cross different aspects of life science investing. I am in the early stage company building part of the organization, which has been going for 48 years. We have recently added a growth, crossover growth fund, and also a number of funds, early stage funds based in Milan and in Paris.
Great, thank you. And next to Hubert at TBM.
My name is Hubert Birner. I've been with TBM for 20 years, and I'm one of the owners and managing partner at TBM, based in Munich. We also have an office in Montreal and a small base left in Boston. Our main activities can be summarized that we invest in the early stage, preclinical stage, phase 1, in a project-focused approach where we create holding companies that only develop one asset. And we also invest in later stage companies that have already significantly discharged the technology risk, either pre-commercial growth capital or the like in the life sciences, both biopharma, diagnostics, and medtech.
Thank you. And next we go to Regina.
Regina Huditz. I'm a managing partner at Wellington Partners, also based in Munich. It's quite fun, Hubert. I never thought that we would actually outnumber all of the other countries on a panel on a European life science VC group, because I guess between Hubert and us, you have the majority of the money to be invested in life sciences in Germany represented on this show. We are one of the kind of mid-sized European players. We have 400 million under management. We've been around also for a long time. So I personally have been investing for 20 years. Life science activities at Wellington also date for about the same time. And we invest in anything that actually changes medical practice to the better for the patients, doctors, and payers alike. So that means we really invest cross-spectrum in biotech. We like platforms more than projects, so we don't see Hubert much on that front. We like also therapeutic devices. We do a bit of diagnostic, and we've recently started to do some digital health.
Thank you, Regina. And Sander, over to you next.
Yes, thanks, Graham. Name is Sander Slootweg, one of the managing partners at Forbion, a Dutch-based venture firm focused on mostly therapeutics investments in predominantly Europe, but also extending our reach into North America. We have offices near Amsterdam here, which is our headquarters. And in addition to Hubert and Regina are also quite active investing in Germany from our Munich offices, and we have recently opened offices, more of a business development office towards Asia and Singapore. We manage currently well in excess of 1 billion euros across various strategies. So we've recently over the summer raised a growth fund, venture growth fund, to focus on the more late stage end of the drug development spectrum. We also operate a joint venture with a group called Biogeneration Ventures to cater to the very early stage investment realm, especially focused on university spin-outs. And with our current fund, Forbion 4, we are sort of a mid-stage investor where we do about 1/3 company creation and 2/3 our best selection of the existing universe of exciting biotech companies. So that's us in a nutshell.
Thank you very much to my panelists. So I found a very unpleasant quote earlier from a 20th century American journalist, Henry Mencken, who many of you will be familiar with. He said there are two types of Europeans, the smart ones and those who stay behind. Well, we are clearly going to turn that principle on its head with 5 very, very smart Europeans here on the call. I know many of you spent time in the US, and clearly Mencken was commenting on the superiority of the US. But what we want to try to do is find out really from our experts on this panel, and there's a lot of money assembled around the table, and there's a lot of deep expertise. They've invested at all stages of the life cycle of biotech companies, as you've heard in the introductions. We really want to focus on what Europe has been really good at, and also perhaps learn some of the lessons over the last 15 years as the market has grown both in size for European funds and also in levels of sophistication in terms of treatments that are available, and new drugs and cell therapy, etc., which has been a really very important development. So what I want to do is start by asking my panelists what are we actually doing really well in Europe? And you've all talked about, a couple of you talked about the size of your funds. 1 billion was mentioned by you, Sander. That was unheard of just 5 or 6 years ago. So maybe you want to start, just give me an indication, and then I'll bring in some of the other panelists. What are we doing well in Europe at the moment from your experience being right there in the center of things?
Yes, well, of course, the 1 billion is across the various funds that we manage. It's not that we manage a single billion fund, just to take away any misunderstandings. So what are we doing well? I think what we have been doing well and are still doing well is being excellent at science. So a lot of fundamental research carried on in Europe is world class. If you look at statistics, for instance, numbers of patents filed with European inventors, or publications in peer-reviewed journals with European authors, I think we are at least at par with other important parts of the world like US and Asia. So I think that is definitely a very strong basis to start, for instance, creating companies of. I think what we're doing increasingly well is to have a deeper pool of experienced managers and entrepreneurs, which I think was lacking a little bit a few years back. But we have back now several repeat entrepreneurs, on their second or third or even fourth venture. So I think that is something that is quite important, to be able to tap into an experienced base of both founders and managers. So I think those are two things that I think we're currently doing well when it comes to Europe.
Okay, Regina, any views from Germany and from a Wellington perspective about what you're seeing that encourages you about the future?
No, absolutely. I think Sander has already mentioned the most prominent point. I've given a talk on Austrian TV yesterday, and they asked kind of also, what is it that we're actually good at? And if you look at all of the latest kind of revolutions on the healthcare side, Europe can claim actually the being the founding father, mother, or whatever of a number of those over the last 2 decades. So going to something where Sofinova and we have made money, for example, on the device side, minimal invasive heart valve replacement comes from Europe, is now a 5 billion market growing to nearly double the size. Also on the device side, deep brain stimulation neurostim is a European invention that comes from here. And if you look to monoclonal antibodies, where 3 out of the top 10 drugs are based on those technologies, they come out of Cambridge, UK. And Humira was a co-development between a Cambridge-based biotech and a German pharma company, sold for less than 1/3 of its last annual revenues to AbbVie. So we are really good at innovating. We are really good at translation in the meantime. There's a lot of really good translational structures, and I have several people from Boston that sometimes are considering going to Germany or Austria because there's so much early stage funding there, pre-company formation, that they cannot even get there locally off the ground. And where we basically have to get to is that we also get the growth capital.
Yeah, and Maina, is that something that rings true with you? I mean, you know, I guess COVID has shown us, if it's shown us nothing else, it's shown us the excellence of European science, right? And the you know, the number of technologies that are being worked on that were discovered in Europe. So.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think, you know, we have excellent science, and I think we have pockets where we're superb at cell and gene therapy. I mean, we have a fund that is dedicated towards cell and gene therapy in Milan because whilst Italy is not known for its biotech, actually it's really well known for the cell therapy and gene therapy development. And so there are pockets within Europe that are excellent at what they do. Clearly, vaccine technology has been fantastic coming out. I mean, some of the best ones or the leading ones are coming out of Europe. So we're excellent at that. We do have some limitations on management. I think we're getting better at it, but we definitely do have some limitations in management. But I don't think you can fault European science at all. I think getting it out and getting it funded and getting the TTOs to help you build or help you get the science out of some of the universities is a little bit challenging sometimes, but actually definitely the science exists.
So Houman and Hubert, I want to ask you just to touch on what Maina just said, the challenges with management. You know, I often see sitting in board meetings of biotech companies, as I often do, that, you know, when a discussion comes up about, for example, a CMO candidate, because you're in the clinic and you're really expanding, you're going to a phase 2 study, for example, you know, the candidates that most commonly come up are for those kind of roles, frankly, are US candidates. And that's partly because, you know, maybe some of the trials are being done in the US, but not always the case. Can you just give me a flavor? Maybe Hubert, you want to go first, and then Houman on how you think we can, or we have clearly got better at the management piece, but how we can create, you know, serial entrepreneurs that have tremendous track records, and they're the kind of people you want to invest in, presumably.
Yeah, so I'm less pessimistic about the management quality going forward, given that I have seen this emerging over the last 20 years. We have boardroom discussions on how to make a Brit return to Europe. And then the question is, for instance, how do you give enough incentives to somebody who's British, who spent 15 years of his career in San Francisco to come to Berlin, for instance, or to Munich? Because in the end, we are now fishing heavily into the returner community that wants to be active back in Europe. There's also certain US fatigue of many of these people over the last 3 years that helps significantly, both in the German-speaking part of Europe, but I'm sure the same is true in the Dutch-speaking part as well as in the French-speaking part. And don't forget, many of the very successful managers in the US have initially also been US trained, and at the end of the day are looking for a way back. So there is quite an interesting mix now of people that would like to come back, that have come back very successfully. So on the manager side, I'm less worried that we will lack continuously a pool of people going forward. On the serial entrepreneur side, it's clearly an observation that we now see people that have done a great exit 3-4 times in the course of a 10-year, 15-year professional history. Some people have turned around things faster in the last 6-7 years, given the public markets successes. So those are the ones that we need to groom, that we need to keep busy, and also need to basically if they stop being operationally full time, get on boards because they can share a lot with the new teams. So we are getting there. There are people that obviously do not work out, like in every situation, but the pool is growing larger and larger as we speak.
And Houman, I know you had some fascinating statistics on, on R&D and its effectiveness in certain large pharma companies. And one of the things that I know that has often been said is that we lack, we lack real pharma depth because of the relative lack of large pharma in Europe, both at R&D and commercialization stage. What's your view on this complicated subject, as more and more R&D has been outsourced, I guess, by large pharma in Europe?
I'm going to start with two caveats before I get going. One is that we really deserve to pat ourselves on the back as Europeans. In a week where the two predominant vaccines against the most unprecedented pandemic of our time has been developed solely, almost exclusively in Europe, I think we have just cause, one of those in Germany, one of those in the UK, I think we have just cause to pat ourselves on the back. And I agree with Hubert that we don't have a right to be pessimistic. I think we have a right to be optimistic. The other comment before I jump into your question is to argue very clearly that we're looking at a snapshot. So we have a very dynamic system that's moving and transitioning from a historical norm to a new norm. And I think anything we say today should be viewed through the prism of that transition. To your question specifically, I think Europe has a number of drawbacks that are being solved. My colleagues have pointed to how a number of them are being solved. I think the absence of a vibrant, especially mid-cap, a large-cap pharma community in Europe, I should say paucity because there are a large number of players here, but a relative paucity of these players is very important in Europe and it's something we need to resolve for two reasons. One is that those organizations represent the training grounds for the next generation of medium to senior R&D and otherwise management. If you think about the challenges of today of gene and cell therapy, there's a panoply of organizations in the US that are training, churning people through them and providing diverse expertise. We have a relative paucity of those sort of mid-cap, billion to multi-billion-dollar organizations that are going to be training, cell and gene therapy people as well as biologics and small molecules. And secondly, not having innovative acquirers on our doorstep is a limitation for some of our biotech companies. And if you look at the role of some of the organizations in the US, which have large balance sheets that can drive M&A activity and continue to cycle entrepreneurs and management, I think that the catalyst of mid to large cap organizations in Europe will be something we need to resolve.
I'm very pleased also to hear, thank you for that, Houman. I'm very pleased to hear of your optimism, I think, from everyone on the panel about the availability of early stage financing for promising science. But let's now move to how much more difficult it gets, or maybe you're going to say it's got a lot better in Europe, that the investing environment is now much rosier than it was a few years ago. But as these companies get bigger, phase 2, phase 3, dare I say it, how can you comment please on how much more difficult it gets as the amounts of capital that need to be raised get ever larger to go through the later parts of the clinic and then through to commercialization, and whether that is something that in the near term you see Europe being able to handle for European companies, biotech companies, without the intervention of US capital. So, Sander, I know you've got direct experience with AM Pharma, for example, so maybe you want to chime in on this one.
Yeah, so it's indeed, I would say, a relatively new trend that we're seeing in our sort of weekly deal flow. Since about 12 to 18 months, we see vastly increasing numbers of later stage companies, either platform companies that are relatively mature, or companies indeed developing assets through phase 2 and phase 3. So I think that's a testimony of the maturing, I think, of the European industry as a whole. And I think it's also a function of the fact that pharma have decided already years ago that they can't be everything to everyone when it comes to R&D, and that their R&D dollars or euros are limited, and that they therefore need to focus on a limited number of therapeutic areas. And that means that certain companies that develop products outside of those the top therapeutic areas, that they will have to, on their own euro or dollar, develop these assets through phase 2 and phase 3. So I think that's what we're seeing. And then, of course, pharma, from their balance sheet, they still have very strong balance sheets. They can acquire these companies by the time that the products are approved or nearly approved to feed these products into their sales force. So that's one of the things, for instance, that has also affected AM Pharma, which is developing, which is one of our portfolio companies. They're developing a drug for acute kidney injury, which of course is a hospital care sort of ICU product, and there are relatively few pharmas that have R&D money to spend in that space. So this company was also sort of forced to have to raise around to finance their pivotal phase 3 study, which I think a couple of years ago would have been virtually impossible. But now I think there are increasingly large European funds, and there are also American funds that see that the grass is somewhat greener on this side. So AM Pharma was able to close on I think it's now 168 million euro round, and they have just actually put out a press release, I think today, that they've enrolled the first patient into this pivotal phase 3. So I think that's indeed a clear example of a company that probably a few years ago would have had a real problem to finance an endeavor like that. Also because the European public markets have not been as functional as a source of late-stage capital for biotechs, by and large, some exceptions, as has, for instance, NASDAQ been a real catalyst for maturing and for the successes that we've seen in the US biotech industry, because it represents one single pool of very specialized, deep sort of knowledge capital that can be tapped into, and where indeed there's also this recycling, where the funds that invest in the best private assets, they then list them within 12 to 18 months, and at some point they liquidate their positions and they can plow back this money into the most exciting private assets. And that wheel has been turning now in the US since about 2013. And we have totally sort of missed that boat in Europe when it comes to the European exchanges, because we just have too much dispersed capital markets. We don't have one equivalent to NASDAQ. So I think that is one of the reasons why European companies historically have had bigger issues to access late-stage capital, which I think now we're able to turn around by also focusing our European companies at some point to make the jump to NASDAQ, but also by making sure that there are sufficient pools of late-stage capital for private rounds. Like, for instance, the fund that we raised over the summer, the Forbion Growth Opportunities Fund 1, but also Sovinova, for instance, and others. They also have pools of capital to finance these late-stage, clinical late-stage assets.
So what I'm hoping, thank you for that, Zander, that's very insightful. So Regina, I'm hopeful that I'm going to sit around the table when our clients are talking about, their Series C or their crossover, and the names that are going to come up are going to be Sofinova and Forbion and SV and Wellington and TVM for that matter. But in other words, predominantly European funds who can front run or lead these rounds. How far do you think we are away from that? Because at the moment it's clear that the Baker brothers, the Perceptives, the Orbimeds, I mean, they're the names that always come up on shortlists of people with very deep pockets. But what's your perception?
I think we're pretty capable in Europe to put together syndicates now of 50, 70 million euros. And this is actually a quite large number if you want to bring one or two drugs through a initial clinical proof of concept. So I think there, the world looks very, very different to what it did before. So if you look at the Series A's that have been done, I still think, there's no comparison. I've just got the data open for last year. Europe as a whole is still trailing at about 40% of the biotech VC money than the US. And we are, that was actually 25%. That was at the number of deals. And we have about the same amount of money to be invested in biotech than China. And China had about 20.
I think we lost the connection there.
Last time.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay. Can you hear me back?
Yeah, we just heard the comment about China, I think, being commensurate with Europe.
Good. Let me try again. It tells me that the connection is unstable. If not, then just if it doesn't work, just go to someone else. So in principle, I think for Series A rounds, we are fine, but we're still struggling to get the growth rounds together. But I think with companies like Novo that are going to become credible growth investors, or HBM, or also some of the growth initiatives, we're going to get there. But it's still a long way. So I wanted to also bring the example of our portfolio company Themis that we sold in a quite attractive deal to MSD during the crisis, and also they are one of the 4 out of the top 5 US warp speed vaccine programs now with Merck. The reason why we actually, and we were on a dual path to go to an IPO with them. We had enough US money that wanted to come into the deal at that point in time. We had no European investor at all looking at this opportunity. So everybody had looked at it, everybody had turned it down. There was no interest until Farallon from the US actually led the Series D round over here. And at that time, it was actually too late to build the company out broad enough so that we felt that they should stand alone and go out to NASDAQ. So we had a very good operational team, but we didn't have the team that would really have made the difference on the public markets in the US. And this is, I think, what we need to get to. We need to be able, after the Series A's and the Series B's that we can fund, that we have enough money around the table in Europe, and we have to believe that the next money will be there. So we put our companies on a broad enough footing, and there's a few notable exceptions that we have done, but most of them we actually simply sell too early because we keep them too narrow.
That's very interesting. Houman, I mean, I'm going to come to you because you had your hand up there, but you know, I'm interested in what in what's been said, because what I see traditionally in the US as well is that there are, you know, clubs of investors at these later stages. And do you think that you tell us about your challenges at raising larger amounts of money that we just heard from Regina, but also tell us, you know, whether you think we've got enough of a sort of seamless ecosystem among VCs in Europe to get these deals clubbed, if you like, so that they can get away.
You read my mind, actually, Graham, interestingly, so good on you. What I wanted to do is address exactly that point. I think I've been a very noisy advocate of growth capital in Europe and especially in the UK. I've done it on 2 panels this week, actually, so people are probably bored of hearing my advocation for growth capital, what I call crossover capital. But I want to call out a nuance. The reason that we've got receptive public markets in the US is not just because there are good analysts. That is true, there are. It's not because there's a critical mass alone. That is, of course, true. But I think the reason there's been a change over the last 10 years is there have been a movement by hedge funds, by sovereign wealth funds, mutual funds into the life sciences space. There have been people who've developed experience on the almost retail side in participating in IPOs. And the reason they've come in is that there are credible crossover names that are consistent in the US. It's not just that there is capital with reputation, credibility, and experience. So you've named Baker Brothers, there are others, RA Capital, Med, that cycle through, as Sandra said, and people will follow that money. It's regarded as smart money. What they do is they've had very good valuations, they've had thoughtful price discovery. You know, it's not just been availability of capital, it's deployment of capital smartly by marquee names. And my strong challenge to Europe is not only that we bring capital, but we bring it with the names of people like those around this table who have a club-like interaction with these companies and can raise the value of European crossover investing. By the way, people have been deeply pessimistic. I've been on record being pessimistic about European public markets. I'm not as pessimistic as I used to be. If we develop a cadre of people that can guide the retail investors into this space, I think the European public markets will rise to the challenge. But at the moment, we don't have that intermediation. And I think that's really critically important.
Yeah, and you know, we heard from Regina earlier about, you know, how Humira came out of CAT, Cambridge Antibody Technology, but you know, got sold very early. I mean, you know, Maina and Hubert, how do we create the next GenMab, if you like, the next European GenMab? And you know, based on what Houman's just said and some of these challenges, you know, I can see there's some light coming, but you know, what do we need to do to get there? I don't know whether either of you can comment on that. Maina, maybe you want to go first.
Yeah, so I mean, look, from my perspective, I think we are getting to the point where we have credible crossover and later stage investors, and we can bring in, we don't have to have club deals. We don't have to have only Europeans around the table. We can have US investors and Chinese investors and investors from all around the globe. What you do need is are a couple of strong local investors who can lead those processes. And I think we're getting to that point. We're not there yet completely. What we don't have, I think, is the public markets. And I think, yes, it's you know, we can help bridge that gap with some of the funds, but you need much deeper pockets and much broader pockets of money. You also need, you know, in addition to some of our crossover type investors or growth investment, you need deep specialist public investors, and we don't have that in the life sciences field yet. And I think it's going to take some time. But I think what we do have and what we are doing more and more of is using NASDAQ as a way to get access to capital for those European funds, for those European companies, which allows them to stay independent for a little bit longer, not get sold out, you know, as soon as the initial investors need an exit. And I think that is happening a lot more, and it'll continue to happen. I'm not sure that we'll be able to build out the European public side of things, but I think the more crossover and the more specialist firms we can bring into European deals, the longer we can keep some of those companies around.
So Hubert, thank you for that minute. Hubert, do you think that Neil Woodford and Patient Capital could have done better if they'd been joined by some other similarly placed investors with lots of capital, or maybe there was a more underlying problem there? Because of course they were investing largely in you know, European companies that were listed here locally, not so many US companies.
So I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, but there's one thing that I would like to bring into the conversation as well, which is what I call the third force that we shouldn't overlook, because this is going to be a massive additional benefit for the European environment. And these are the billionaires and private investors that have decided that they would come out of a completely different industry and put money into our industry, either together with us or with great third or fourth time founders. And you know, I was joking yesterday about Biotech, because I think 10 years ago, Sandra and I looked at this at the initial startup in Frankfurt, and obviously it was far too early to invest for either one of us. And then they obviously found the Strungmann brothers as investors, right? And they have been very patient. They have been very supportive of management teams, and not just in Biotech but in others. And I was joking yesterday. They put at least 3 or 4 times the money that we could have ever put as a syndicate before getting impatient. Yeah. And had Forbion or TVM or anybody else invested at the time, I think they would have never made it to a vaccine, coming back to Houman's point earlier, because we would have had to have an exit, we would have had this, we would have been a phase 3 study and that kind of stuff, right? And then I have a lot of respect for these people, because obviously the Strungmanns are from the industry, but then take CureVac, right, which is the other flagship company in Germany, where Dietmar Hopp keeps pouring money into this. I have a lot of respect for him, because he has made billions on software investing, which is probably a much safer bet than in biotech, right? But at the same time, this is the third force, and we're seeing the same, you know, on our late stage side, the deals. I'm sure you can confirm in Maina in France and in the UK, of similar type of people that all of a sudden are providing an additional esprit, an additional runway to companies that we haven't seen before, and these people we will see also as co-investors to a certain extent in our late stage deals. they are very patient. And I think that is a massive difference from the US that we should still kind of foster and be appreciative about, because I think the community needs different sources of capital, right? It needs different sources of, or different approaches to invest. And I don't think we would have a COVID-19 vaccine without these people and their different approach from investing.
Yeah, we see people like Morningside as well, increasingly
Exactly.
active, and they're exactly the same type of fund that you just described, right? I mean, very long term. Not that they don't care if the companies sell early, and they don't care so much if they don't get co-invest dollars either. I mean, because they tell companies that they can fund them all the way through to approval, actually, and commercialization. Whether that's true, I don't know what their success is at that. Anyone else want to comment on that, which I think is really, really interesting, and I hope is a very welcome development.
Yes. Graham, so you asked, how we're going to build the next GenMap. So we also asked ourselves that question, and of course, GenMap is a prime example of a company that weathered a lot of adversity and had difficulty to finance itself through the various phases of growth, but ultimately succeeded. The same would go for Argenix or Galapagos or even a different type of business model like with Evotech. And so we decided with our new growth fund that we should really tap into all this experience. And so we asked the CEOs of these companies to join our advisory group of this fund. And so they gladly did so because they're very passionate about developing the European growth and public space to a point where we can sustain these type of companies for their development. And so we're essentially teaming up with them and being able to tap into their experience and networks, and they will mentor some of the CEOs of our companies. And I think that is another thing we need to do as Europe. We need to really come together and in this club sort of style try to jointly grow this space, because again, there's plenty of foundational sort of value fundamentals in Europe to really build several more GenMaps and Galapagos and Argenix into the future.
I mean, Evotech is a very interesting example that you highlighted there, Zander, because they invest in a whole bunch of private companies, as you know, and they often have commercial arrangements with those companies and help them to grow. I mean, do you see that as an increasing phenomenon? It's interesting that we've got a raft of specialty pharma now that are increasingly willing to do that because it is high risk and it's not necessarily what they do day to day. But is that something you're seeing, Houman, as well, or Regina or Maina? I mean, are you seeing these types of players which are different from the traditional players come into your cap tables or have discussions with you?
I roll back to Hubert's question as we answer a point, because I think there's more nuance in that question. I thought Hubert made a great point about the third force. I think the third force is a force for good and perhaps a force for not so good. And I think that there's two sides to that. The side that you describe, Hubert, I think is very good, and there are American examples, and I agree with Maina that it's important to have a diverse ecosystem of American and European club investors in our and actually Chinese investors in our ecosystem. The only proviso and caveat is, of course, having non-specialist investors investing in something that's really technical, and being a bit patient may not be the best thing for the company, in my humble opinion. So for some of these companies, we've seen non-specialist investors come in, and they've seemed to be patient initially, often from backgrounds where gearing has been an important part of their investment thesis, and then they come into these companies and expect results very much like they would in software, as Hubert rightly says. So I think in some contexts these third forces can be awesome, and Hubert, you've outlined a couple of them, and I think I agree entirely. In other contexts, they've been extremely disruptive in European companies, where they've come in, they've become incredibly enamored with the desire for tick-ups in the valuations of their companies, and have had unrealistic views about the valuations at IPO and their ultimate gains. And I think we need to. I think what I would do is I would partner with Hubert. Actually, I would seek to bring these people into our world, but I'd also seek to educate them about the value they bring if they're patient, and the dangers they bring if they seek to either influence management with skills that come from disciplines that are not adjacent, or indeed getting impatient and wanting their 14th yacht.
Thank you very much for that, Houman. I want to just have one more question that I'll pose, and then there's a very interesting question that came in because we only have 5 to 10 minutes left from the audience, which I'd like to finish up with. But I hope there's more than one person thinking of asking questions. But please do, anyone in the audience, if you said anything interesting or you want us to say something interesting, then please do send in a question, and Josh will send it on. So I guess I wanted to ask, from your vantage point at the moment, valuations are pretty lofty. I think the capital markets are very healthy. What are the challenges that you're seeing? Are you seeing deals being bid up to the point where you think that they're not realistic? Are you seeing big step changes between a Series A and a Series B, or a B and a C, where you feel there's been enough value increase demonstrated to reflect that valuation? Is the market still rational? I'm interested to hear from you on that, because you see proposals every day and you have discussions with founders, and there's going to be founders and entrepreneurs on this call listening to us. Hubert, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, so it's getting Christmas time, right? So Graham, you're asking what do I wish for Christmas in our industry?
Yeah.
I think I would wish for a couple of new groups that come in with more money, because I've been on these kind of panels with the same people in the last 20 years, and it would be great to have fresh faces, fresh ideas, fresh names to come in across Europe. So people that invest in all our countries, right? So not just a pocket for the UK, a pocket for the German-speaking region or the Benelux. So that's one I would like to have. So there's more options for companies to go to, bring in new spirits, like we have seen a little bit in Boston and East Coast since 2014. The other wish that I have is that we see more and more late stage money also going into European IPOs as an interim step to basically take companies public first on Euronext and then go back to the US, but with people that can follow the money and bring in crossover investors from the US. So there's hopefully something that could make our European public market a little bit more, put some new breath into our European markets, right? And then I think the last point that I'd like to make is that I still see, for all the reasons that people have mentioned, we see all this great European science, a lot of early stage stuff. We still have a significant lag in going into preclinical stage companies that have great potential. A lot of us have shied or are still shying away from going too early, right? But that's the place where Europe can actually make a big difference going forward, because the science is fantastic. And if I may have my last wish for Christmas, Graham, I would like to have much more money going into early platform companies or early preclinical stage companies going forward.
Thank you very much for that, Hubert. And Regina, what do you want? What's your wish list for your socially distanced Christmas this year?
First of all, I take everything that Hubert has said. That's absolutely clear. So I think if we could get to a Europe where also amongst the existing players that we are here, we build syndicates that can really see companies through. We've started to do that. We've recently done a seed deal in Denmark type where we brought 4 big European investors into a very, very early stage company, because we know if these guys succeed, they're going to need a lot of money. And we really want to be able to build this one big. And so I wish that there's more of those syndicates that we can build. And I wish also for on top of what Hubert has said, I would like the entrepreneurs in Europe, I would like them to have a much better incentive system so that it's easier for us to make them serial entrepreneurs, because if they pay between 0 and 25% tax on their capital gains, if they become investors themselves, and they pay up to over 50% tax on any kind of incentive they make by being a CEO, we're driving them out of the market. So I'm wishing for a bit of better regulation there. And for the German market, I just wish for a number of more investors that come and help us grow our existing funds, because while I agree with Hubert's wish that we need new people, I think all of our funds could actually play a better role in creating this growth universe if the funds themselves would actually be a bit bigger.
That's really helpful. Sander, what's on your ideal Amsterdam socially distanced Christmas list, apart from what you've already heard?
Yeah, it's going to be increasingly difficult to add to this already lofty of good wishes. So I think I'll just express a general wish that I think we all have, is that the whole vaccine development will really come through in a way that in the course of the first half of next year, most of us can get access to a vaccine if and when desired and needed, and that we can sort of carry on with business in a more normal fashion and can have normal conferences in person with all the social aspects and of that nature.
Terrific. I have a question that I'm now going to pose to Houman and Maina about from the audience. According to Mike Gatto, Global Head of Life Science Investment at JP Morgan, valuations on IPO are being increasingly based on platform technologies with a great story rather than clinical data. Would the panel like to comment? Maina, would you like to, do you have a view on that?
Yeah, so I think that's probably true in the last, in the last few months, and that's probably correct. You are seeing a lot of IPOs that have gone preclinical companies gone public. But I think so there is a bit of euphoria at the moment, but I think that will correct. But I think a lot of those companies also have good technology. So giving value to platform companies is not necessarily a bad thing.
Houman, I think you're more of an optimist, aren't you? The glass is definitely half full.
Yeah, I'm definitely an optimist. I'd like to do 2 quick points here. The first is about my Christmas wish. I wish for ambition for Europe. I wish for us to be not only speaking about being outstanding scientists, which we are. The UK gets about 3% of the world's science funding and publishes 16% of the world's science papers and 11% of the patents. So I'm definitely an optimist, but I want us to stop talking about science alone. I'm passionate about science. Those that know me know that I eat, drink, and sleep science, but I think that what we need to do is talk about converting science. We need to talk about industrialization of science. We need to have manufacturing, CMC, and other capabilities in Europe where we can grow our science into real drugs and scale. And to your point about platform technologies, I'm not sure I agree, actually. I think that what we're seeing is companies that dress themselves up as platform companies appropriately, but actually the fundamentals still relate to clinical assets. Immunomedics was not acquired at a major premium because it was a platform company. It was an asset company. Similarly, BMS's latest acquisition, Myocardia, was not acquired because it was a platform company. It was a single asset company in essence, which would generate revenue. The fundamentals won't disappear. So my strong advocacy for our sector, it's not just for the companies, but for the whole sector, is if the sector is to survive, what we can't have is a large number of notable failures where people have plowed a ton of money and that money disappears because the preclinical signal also disappears. I think as a sector, we have to be good stewards of how we speak to the public market, and that requires clinical results. So I am optimistic, but I think that there will be a correction towards companies with clinical assets that deliver and generate revenue. I mean, that last point is critical. There are many technologies that are currently in the clinic which do save lives, whose pricing and revenue model has not been validated. And that bird will come home to roost at some point. So I think as an industry, we need to be good stewards of that.
Thank you very much. I mean, I've got one last question that's come in, and then I think we can wrap up and hand back to Josh. So, the third source that was talked about earlier by you, Hubert. There's a question that's come in to say, how, and I suppose it's a broader question. How do you persuade more of those sorts of investors, which I think you think are good for the general biotech community in Europe? How do you persuade more of them into the market? I guess you have to create more of them in the first place, but how do you persuade more of them into the market? And then secondly, why are there so few? Why is there such a kind of lack of funds in Germany, given Germany's strong pharma and biotech sector?
Yeah, maybe I can take the point on Germany. I've been the spokesperson for the industry for the last 5 years, and it's really been, and Hubert knows that because he had to vote with his feet and actually spend some time on the other side of the Atlantic, because there was so little money of all of the money that does exist, both from this so-called third force, the private investors, but also from the large capital collection groups, let's say insurance companies, banks, and all of that. And this is still absolutely an issue in Germany. We see very little money going into venture still. It is increasing a little bit, but it's still seen as kind of a side activity. And what is needed is more information that venture is creating returns. I also disagree that it's easier to make returns on the IT sides. The numbers speak for life sciences. If you look at the numbers from the EIF, and communicating that and creating incentives for people to actually put more money into established funds is something that we've been working on as an industry for some time. And here actually the third force does help a lot. And of course the COVID vaccine and the excitement about that does help a lot. So I hope that we won't get this question back if we talk about this again in 3 years.
Yeah, but for instance, one way to enthuse more very, as I said, the ultra high net worth individuals or the super angels into our industry is to first entice them to invest with us in our funds, give them co-invest rights, so give them more exposure to how business is being conducted in our space, and then entice them to set up some infrastructure of their own, because it is a very knowledge intensive industry. So you cannot just, if you have a lot of money, splash it around, but you really need to properly understand what you're getting into. So it does require a fair bit of infrastructure, even for these groups, these super angels.
And it also requires a certain attitude from us to bring in these people and to work with them. So I have to say, I had like 4 major exits where half of the money came from business angels or super angels, and they were not represented on the board, but they were very active shareholders. They were not industry knowledgeable shareholders, but have been fantastic supporters of the companies. So we at TVM have a lot of experience with these people. Also, as Regina said, because we had to have people like those in a capital deprived environment. So I think the way to bring them in is exactly as Sandra said. Convince them that they come in on the fund level, which is highly de-risked as relative to just one shot on goal in one company. And then if it's late stage enough, people can understand the value proposition of the technology and also have an exit horizon of 2 to 4 years. Try to convince them, try to make them participate, try to make money, and then obviously we can together groom the third force, so we don't have the disadvantages that Houman was talking about. Yeah. So I think it's also a little bit on us how to make this even more fertile.
Thank you, Hubert. So I'm going to give the last word to Maina and Houman because I want to, basically. So Maina, please give us the penultimate last word, and then over to you, Houman.
Yeah. So I think we're going to make Europe. I think this group of people will help make European continue to make great investments in Europe, and I am very excited about continuing to invest in Europe, and I think we have a good group of solid investors that will continue to invest here, and can really change the outlook for European companies.
Thank you, Houman.
What's your last I want to finish on a very clear note, which is scarcely 1 year ago, if I said to you, Graham, that biotech would be a safe harbor and outperform the S&P 500, not only would you laugh at me, you'd say, you'd get me certified. That's exactly what we've done. If I said to you last year that biotech not only would support itself, but would be the knight in shining armor, riding in to support the retail and the leisure sector, you would laugh at me. If I said to you that the front cover of every newspaper in the world would focus on biotech, you would say I'm literally crazy. However, biotech has done that. We're a matured sector. We're a sector to invest in, and we've got people who are serious around this table and others who are willing to lay their experience on the line. The only thing I'd add to it is I'm just going to go back to a comment that Regina made. Actually, we are an era of data science. I think all of you nowadays will now use your phone to get you from London to Paris, whether that's by train or by car. You have Google Maps or Apple Maps or whatever. It's time we stop practicing healthcare in the way that we used to drive from London to Paris with an atlas or a guide. It's time we started practicing healthcare in a digital and data science era. And my prediction, my wish for Christmas, is that we begin to apply the technologies we've learned to use in the rest of our lives to healthcare and allow them to demonstrate to the patients where we generate value. The future will no doubt be a marriage between data and therapeutics, which are wrapped in a very cozy, beautiful Christmas blanket of growth capital.
Roll on, here, roll on all of your aspirational Christmases. And all I can say is I look forward to doing one of these with the next one of these in person with you in 2021 as a result of the great strides that the biotech sector is making in coming up with a COVID-19 vaccine. I want to thank you all for tremendously thought-provoking comments and for giving your time up today to participate in this panel. And over to you, Josh, just to wrap it up.
Thanks so much, Graham, and thanks to the whole panel. I took the words right out of my mouth as to how I was going to sum up and to say to Sandra's point and yours just there, very much hoping we'll be back being able to do this in person before too long, certainly at some point in 2021. But while we're not able to meet and while virtual is the future, thanks so much for all of you for joining us and sharing your expertise and insights with the audience. This session will be available now on demand pretty much as soon as it's run. Any more questions or comments that you have, please do put them in the questions function, and it'll be available for the rest of the event. The platform still remains open for partnering, for watching the showcase videos and all the content from today through until the end of Monday. And Monday is when we return for our second major content day, where we'll be digging into some of the issues in the US capital markets, consumer health, innovation, and how that's affecting the sort of wider investment sector, and our traditional keynote from Defries, our exclusive partner for the Investable Showcase. So thank you all again to our panel. Thank you to Graham for taking us through our final session of the day. We do have an interactive sort of networking session, not quite the same as having a beer at the end of a conference as you normally would, but sort of speed networking session to maybe meet some new faces. So I'd encourage you all to join there. Otherwise, we'll see you again live on the 16th. And thanks again all for joining us today.